Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to the 2018 annual Antonija Prelec Memorial Lecturer. So the Prelec Lecture, as you will hear, was inspired by a very special person. Arthur Broman will be telling you about her in a moment. And we're very happy to have as our speaker this year, Sally Gore from the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. So with that, Arthur, please go ahead.
Well, it's my privilege again this year to be able to say a few words about Antonija Prelec. She was the founding librarian of the Health Sciences Center, and I was one of the original faculty, so I worked very closely with her and was one time the chairman of the library committee. Tony was recruited from Princeton by Ed Pellegrino, himself the founding vice president and dean of the medical school, where Tony there at Princeton was head of the libraries of math and physics, and she was actually trained in both those fields in Croatia. Now, Pellegrino was a scholar himself. You'd find him in his office reading Latin and Greek for pleasure, and he knew the importance of the library. So long before either I or Tony were here, he was buying books, particularly the old journals, which were always critical to have. So when Tony came, he had filled the empty grocery stores in Stony Brook with all the old journals, which you could get cheap, but for a librarian, particularly in that day, were critical. Now, for those of you under 30 who do your library work in your office with PubMed and don't visit the physical library, you really don't fully appreciate how much that was that era. The library was really the heart of the institution. It was the heart for the clinicians, it was the heart for the scientists, and for the professors. And Tony made this so much of a pleasure and so informative to use. Now, the librarian, of course, chose the books, and she chose all the books because you couldn't purchase everything or all the journals. And she would come to your office carrying under her arm 4 or 5 books and say, in your field, and say, which one would you think we should get? Now, she already knew. She had done the research. She knew which one was the best. So if you were lucky, you picked out the one that she had, but she had already figured it out. She was just making us feel good. Now, she was also a gourmet chef, as was her husband. And that went to the benefit of the library committee. That was a committee you wanted to be on because you got dinners at the Prelec home, which were in very special wines. So that was very special. But the thing that stands out, one of the many things that stands out, was her champion of new technologies, particularly the digital. Now, that kept the Health Sciences Library on the cutting edge, but we're talking 35 years ago. So as chair of the library committee, she sent me at the library's expense to California, to UCSF, which was the only institution in the country that was doing digital sort of things, just to find out what it was. That's how far ahead she was. So the Memorial Fund was established in the year 2000 in honor of Tony by her husband, Christo, who was a physicist at Brookhaven, and also friends and colleagues, some of whom are here, I'm pleased to notice, at Stony Brook. Now, the purpose of the fund is to continue Tony's pursuit of excellence in medical librarianship and also to improve the information services provided by the Health Sciences Library. So thinking ahead, we thought that was most appropriate. Now, the endowment provides grants for an annual visit and a lecture for the Prelec visiting scholar, who is selected for his or her expertise in medical librarianship and information sciences. And on our library website, you'll see that we've hosted a series of very distinguished Prelec lecturers. And today our distinguished lecturer Sally Gore will be introduced by Jamie Sokos.
Thank you, Dr. Broman. Good afternoon and welcome again. I am going to I would like to take a moment to recognize how fortunate we are today to have the Prelec family with us. We have Antonia's sons, Marco and Jocelyn, and Jocelyn's wife, Danica, with us today, so it's an extra special honor for us this afternoon, so thank you for joining us. Each year, the committee selects its visiting scholar, and it's always an honor for me to reflect on Antonia's work, her passion for medical librarianship, and really for her love of sharing information and science. This year's scholar especially embodies those qualities and passions in her own work. Sally Gore is currently the manager of research and scholarly communications at the Lamar Souder Library, the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Along with her degree in information science, Sally holds a master's in exercise physiology and a master's of divinity. Sally has published extensively on scholarly communications issues such as the role of librarians in sharing e-science and the initiatives for institutional repositories and data management. Today's talk, entitled Advice and Recommendations for Supporting Clinical Research, A Librarian's Perspective, will demonstrate the librarian's ability to make connections with researchers outside of the traditional library setting. And this is something that I think Antonia herself is very well known for, as you can hear from Dr. Roman's anecdote just a moment ago. So today, please join me in welcoming our 2018 Antonija Prelec Visiting Scholar, Sally Gore.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. This is my, I live up in Massachusetts, as you can tell, this is my, and I've been to New York. I actually went to school in New York, upstate New York, but I've never been to Long Island until I came down. So, what a fun place. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you again for just let me pull this out. Okay. So before I get started, I want you to do a little exercise on a scrap piece of paper. I know we have a different kind of, not everybody here is a librarian, and my talk will hopefully not reach everyone, but I want you to think of 5 words that would describe you. Not a sentence, but just like 5 separate words. They could be nouns or adjectives or adverbs or verbs, I guess, whatever. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds. Write them down. Those of you who want to play the game. I'm going to write mine down too, so I'm going to come back to it. Okay. Some scribbling, very good. Okay. Good. 5 words. Keep them aside. We'll come back to those in a bit. So again, I just want to thank you for the invitation. I have to confess that when I got the email from Bruce and Jamie, I literally wrote back and asked if they were sure they sent it to the right person. Because I looked at the list of people who had been here to speak before, and I thought I was in a different league from them. But they assured me that I was the person that they wanted, and so I'm really very, very honored to be here. And whenever I'm invited to do something, I pull out a Field Notes notebook. I don't know if anybody else is a big Field Notes fan, but I am. Whenever I have a new project, I always pull one out. I picked this one in particular because you can see up there, the little arrow up there. It's February 20th, 1962. Does anybody know what happened on that day? This rocket took off. Might be a clue. John Glenn circled the Earth for the first time. He went around a number of times. And this is actually 1 year to the date before I was born, and so I always had this special connection with John Glenn. I thought maybe he was checking out the planet, making sure it was okay for me to arrive a year from then, since I wasn't even conceived yet, but just checking it out. And so that's the one I took all my notes in, and it's just been a wonderful time already. I've had a great chance to go out to dinner last night with folks from the Health Sciences Library. Lots of good conversation, lots of good idea sharing stuff. Talked with the scholarly communication people today, and I love the dental equipment, digital thing. I'm taking that back to pictures and taking that idea back with me. So it's just been a wonderful, wonderful time. I look forward to the rest of today, and certainly for the next 45 minutes or so while I chat with you. But I want to start with a story. This is a picture of the George Washington Masonic Temple. It's in Alexandria, Virginia, and it holds a special place in my life because of two things. One, my paternal grandparents lived on Cedar Street at the base of this Masonic Temple in the heart of Old Town, Alexandria, which is right outside Washington, D.C., if you don't know that area very well. And then my maternal grandfather was a brick mason, and he helped build part of this. So it's always been very important to me, and it's, growing up like 50 years ago, this was, and always visiting my grandparents, this was somewhat of just a touchstone of being there when the Washington metro area wasn't quite what it is today. Because 50 years ago, we had a little change happen in the Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, Washington, D.C. metro area, and that was that the subway came into being. And I don't know if anyone has spent any time in this area, worked in the area, or whatever, but you can see it's changed quite a lot since it began way back there in 1976. And I can remember going with my grandmother and grandfather to downtown to Union Station, which was the original hub of the station, when they were just putting the underground things in, and the pigeons were still flying around all inside, and it was just really cool. But it was the end of taking the bus to the zoo, from with my grandmother. That was the end of that. We could always ride this metro. So just to see from 1976, depending upon how old you are, that's not that long ago, until 1983, and this little circle here, that was my grandparents' King Street. That was the station that was built right around the corner from their house, up until what it might be in 2017, 2020, wherever they're going. Well, today, that's what it is today, and they're still talking about a purple line. People don't like that. But when in 1983 I was in college, it was actually very convenient that my grandparents' home was now on the metro. It's actually because it was easy to get into downtown and have fun and not drive after you've been drinking and all that kind of stuff. And it was just really fun. But it kind of, whenever I looked at this map and this growing change of things, it's very symbolic to me about how an environment can change in a relatively short period of time, and how it certainly affected the neighborhood that my grandparents were in, that my father had grown up in, and all it just changed. And even today, they haven't lived there for a long, they're not alive anymore, they haven't lived there for a long time, but it just changed the whole dynamic of the thing. But they didn't take it badly, it just changed their way of interacting with people. And the same thing has happened to the medical school where I work. So this is the Aaron Lazar building. Aaron Lazar was the first dean and chancellor, well, not the first dean and chancellor, he was the dean and chancellor of the medical school when I started working there, and I started in January 2005. So this building was the first research building built on campus, just in 2001. We were trying to comparing the age of our two medical schools, and they're probably roughly about the same age. We're not that old, either institution. But this was the first dedicated research building that went on campus. And then after that, just a few years later, came this ambulatory care center, which was really going to be the hub where we would share this space with Memorial Hospital, which was connected to us, and the first floor would be dedicated to clinical research. There'd be a clinical research center there. The seventh floor would have some researching, and there would be research physicians physician scientists kind of embedded on each of these floors to sort of promote. People would come in for treatment. They would also open up all these ways to start doing research with patients of specific groups. And the last 3.5 years, I've only been back in the library working for about 6 weeks. The 3.5 years prior to that, I was on the 7th floor of this building working for our Clinical and Translational Science Center, which I'll talk about later. But I just it was a better view than from the library, but it was a nice thing. And then came our Robert Sherman Research Building. It is a gigantic, it's probably bigger than all of the other buildings combined. And it opened in 2013. And really, it's a research center, a teaching center. There are all sorts of simulation centers that are there. The experiential learning places or happening centers are there. There are designated spaces for each of the medical school class houses. Called houses. Each medical student is assigned to one of 5 houses when they come in, and they all have their own space to kind of hang out together and study together and all that. Space for nursing students to study and work together, lecture halls, meeting spaces, classrooms, you name it. And it really shows a shift from a university that was very focused on doing education to a university that's now very focused on research. Education is still very much part of it, but the shift has happened from clinical medical education to clinical and biomedical research and science along with that. And so this is a poster that I did. I think I probably presented it about 2013. You can see where I got the idea for the Metro. So, I did this a few years back for an e-science symposium, and it was showing all of the things that I was doing out of the library. That I had a few grants that I had been a part of, had been added to some research projects around town, research-funded, grant-funded projects, and clinical research, and so I was working for them, and I was kind of getting out trying to do a lot of other work, and you can see I was just sort of making my way into all of these little areas around campus, and the big circle in the middle remained the library, it remained my home, my hub station that you go, but I tried to provide the same services throughout the campus. I certainly wasn't the only person doing this, but I was kind of tasked as the first one to get out the door. I didn't take that personally that they said I was the first person to get out, but there might be something to it. But so those were some of the things I did, and this was all really great, and it was so exciting, and there's so many wonderful projects. But at the same time, it made me feel a little bit like this. Because there was just so much, there was so much expansion, and there were so many things that you wanted to do, or that I wanted to do, and there was just all this growth, and I was discovering all of, these new things, but there was this one particular area that I really started to feel attracted to within scholarly communication, and that was tracking research impact. I was really curious what, all the alternative metrics were growing, bibliometrics research was coming up, and I thought, I really like this. I like to see, people have received this money, and then they write a paper. What beyond the paper is happening with the research that folks are doing? And there's this whole group growing up around that professionally, not just within libraries, but also within some data science and some information management programs around at other universities. And I was like, I really like this. But when you're kind of spread out all over campus, it's very hard to focus and get good at something. And I just really wanted to get good at something. And so I wanted to be able to take my little center, which was me, and find a place that I could just kind of hone in and become an expert on this area of bibliometrics and research impact for a bit. And what that place turned out to be was the UMass Center for Clinical and Translational Science. We received one of the 62 CTSAs from NIH back in 2012, maybe, I think was our first 12, and then 17 we renewed, and then, maybe 2010, 2015 we renewed, and so we're into our second cycle, about to renew again. And I had built relationships with the Translational Science Center a lot through our repository, our digital repository. We've done some really cool projects with them in terms of capturing all of the posters and symposium material that they were doing, the newsletters that they were doing, and putting them in our digital repository so that we could then show back to them, look at all these people that download all these things that you all produce. And it was a nice metric that they could add to their progress reports. And so I looked and I noticed that they had a evaluator position that was open. And I'm like, evaluator? I'm not really an evaluator, I'm a librarian. But I kept reading the job description and I kept thinking, I think I can do some of that job. I think what I want to do in bibliometrics and tracking research kind of translates over into evaluation. And so I convinced them that I could. And I convinced the project director and the PI for the thing and the medical director that said, I think you can do this. And you can hire me to do this. So I left the library, and I've done that for the last few years. And so until, as I say, about 6 weeks ago, I came back to the library. I was recruited and begged, not begged, that just makes me feel good. I was asked strongly if I would consider coming back to the library to manage the research and scholarly communications. And one of the reasons that, other than, I'm sure there's a few reasons, they liked me and they wanted me to come back and they knew me, but I'd also had this 3.5 years where I got to understand this whole other side of the university that I did not know and the work that was being done. Because I knew a lot about basic science research from my time before and starting to get into clinical research. But now, the last 3.5 years, I had learned this entire whole big bunch of stuff that was happening on campus that I didn't know anything about. And so they said, it's time for us to bulk up our services out of the library to clinical research as well as basic science and education. And so come back and lead the efforts along this. So I thought for my talk today, I would give you a few lessons that I've learned, at least through the first few curves. Now I'm back in the library. Hopefully I'm bringing some of these learned lessons back. Time will tell. We'll find out. But the first lesson I want to talk about was on collaboration. And, we have a certain skill set. It's one of the early things that I learned going out. We have a skill set and we know what we can do. As librarians, we kind of go out and, as I said, as a librarian, I knew about bibliometrics and research impact and alternative metrics and things like that. And I had this skill set, and it was transferable into this role of being an evaluator. And I was able to persuade folks that I could do that. I certainly didn't know all the theory and like the real science behind evaluation, but I'm like, I can learn that. I can learn it, And as we often do in libraries nowadays, like if you need an informatics person, you kind of bring in an informatics person and we can teach them the library piece. We can do that. And that's how we sort of expand ourselves. And so we all have we all have skills that sort of transfer. And I'm speaking about librarians, but everybody has skills that transfer over into something else. And the other thing is that similarly, other people have skills that look an awful lot like ours, but they aren't called librarians. And like evaluators do a lot of stuff that look like librarians, but they're called evaluators. I realized in working with this, particularly with the group of CTSA evaluators, that they didn't quite see the library connection, even though I would say, you're doing library work. With the exception of Northwestern University, which is has their evaluation center as part of their library. And so they've really pushed this forward. And I'm good friends with all those people because I loved what they are doing. But there's lots of crossover. And I think particularly when it comes to data, a lot of people are doing the same thing, but we're not all called librarians, right? But the thing about this, what I've learned is that when we see we can do this, and we see these people are doing the same thing, and we often think that the math works like this. We do this, they do this. And there's this gap in the middle, and we can do all this stuff together because we're all doing it together anyway. The lesson that I've learned is that's not really how it works over the time. It seems to work a little bit more like this. We do this on our track, and they do this down on their track. And for the longest time, I fought this, thinking, this is not not good. We should all be doing things together. Together is the way to do it. Together we are stronger. All that kind of thing. But what I learned is that this isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I learned this, the greatest example that I can give along this lines is this. Hot off the presses. This just came out last week. A call for request for information or whatever, give your comments to NIH because NIH is starting to consider a data sharing plan or data sharing mandate. For folks who are not up to speed on this, if you're not, you might recall back in 2004, NIH put out a call for comment and question along of publication sharing and how's that going to go, right? And so then in about 2006, they had this request, why don't you share your papers with PubMed Central? If you've gotten grants from NIH, you should share your papers with PubMed Central. It's public funding. The public has a right to read your research. So that happened. And then in 2008, that became a mandate. And so one of the things I'm most proud of in my time of this first 10 years of working in the library is in about 2004, I just caught wind of this happening, and it interested me what was going to happen with the government and how we're going ahead. And so the director at the time tasked me to put together a task force and just kind of follow it. And so we did follow it. And we went to our research funding office and we said, did you know about this? And they're like, yeah, but we don't really want to know anything about it. We don't want to be involved. We don't want, we got enough to do. And so I said, well, how about we'll just take on the education and awareness campaign. We'll get up to speed on all this. We don't want to deal with compliance because we don't ever want to be the bad guy, but we will do this. And I see this opportunity right here with data as the exact same thing. Except, with the exception of publications were, and I shared this earlier with other people, the tie between publications and libraries was not that hard for people to make. The tie between data and libraries is not quite as easy for us to make. However, we know that this is happening, and so when this call came out, right away I was monitoring the library communications between different listservs, and then even within my own library, and they're like, let's do a webinar, let's talk to the librarians, let's talk this. And I said, no, let's not do that yet. Let's talk to our own, us, and our quantitative methods core people, and our data science and technology department, which is part of our IT group, and the Office of Sponsored Programs, our research funding people, and anybody else who might be doing data. Because if you remember back to the train tracks, we're all doing data on a different level. And so I think the best way that we can structure questions and comments to something like this is from the bigger picture of what is the university going to do. How are we going to address this? Because we can address, as a library, we can address certain parts of it. The IT department can address certain parts of it with the giant, storage places that they have built. Quantitative methods can do with data management. We can do some data management, but they are the real experts in this area. And so I think if we can all get to the table, that's really kind of the way we want to go. Which leads me to the second lesson that I learned, and that's coordination. Because we all work in these, the silos, it's the dreaded silos, and nobody ever wants silos. So we all want to play together. And I have to say, this was the front page of my paper, the Worcester Telegram Gazette, yesterday morning. It could have come at a more timely time because I don't think I could ever see this headline. But the cows were rescued after the silo collapses. And I said, wow, that's what we want. Sadly, one of the cows had to be euthanized, but all the rest were okay, and most of them were out in the field, so they were good. But I said, look at that, silo collapsing. That's exactly what we want to happen, but it isn't going to happen. People, it's never going to happen. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I just didn't think we're ever going to get rid of all of our silos because we just do our work where we do our work. Even the library itself has silos. We'll have our little departments and things. But what we can do really well is coordinate things, right? So there are all of these silos out there, all these people doing different things, And we can serve as the coordination center for all of this. I think physically, when the library was physically a hub, as was mentioned, it was the heart of the university for a long time. We served that manner because people came to the library and we knew what was going on. And we could kind of point people in the same direction. And I think we still have the same call to do that, to know what's going on, to know that kind of high-level thing. And so when I see this, and I see this big picture, and like I see the big picture of data, and I'm like, I see the big picture. I don't know that everybody else does. And I don't mean me personally, but I think libraries see the bigger picture, speaking just being honorary, that we see the bigger picture, that there are other folks that need to be at the table, and so maybe we can, our role is to be the coordinator to bring everybody to the table and to start that conversation amongst everyone. And like kind of do, as LL Bean always says, I lived in Maine for a long time, you can get there from here. Like that's our role. You can get there, we can get there. We can sort of navigate people to where we want to be. And so I saw this in action in a clinical research setting in terms of this. You know, it's the old thing, it's like 17 years from benchtop to bedside before treatments, you know, when we're discovered ever get implemented, or when medical discoveries get implemented as treatments, like 17-year gap. And so that's why the NIH started the whole clinical translational science program. They gave large grants to universities to sort of build this bridge between basic science and research. And one of the things that they do, or charged with doing, my program director, I watched him act very much like a librarian on many times in terms of directing people to where they needed to go, get the research, get the resources they needed, get the money that they needed, to get, you know, whatever, connect them to people that they could collaborate with on research projects. That was sort of their job. In the same way, just like the librarian's job. We have a lot of paving going on in Worcester right now, so our job is just smooth out all of these, you know, bumps along the way, all these barriers. It's the charge to translational science centers, and it's the charge to librarians, I think, as well. I don't know that we'll necessarily ever get rid of the silos, but we can certainly smooth out some of those barriers the more we know about what's going on in the big picture of things. Which brings me to lesson number 3, on communication. And I must confess that the only thing I knew about Stony Brook, other than I have a very good friend who has her PhD in art history from here, is that I knew of this. I knew of Alan Alda and his Center for Scientific Communication, because it's just such a wonderful model. And I've read this book, which is a wonderful book, and he has a terrific podcast right now, which is fairly new. He's talking to all kinds of people about their research and whatever. But the one thing I learned, you know, he learned and shares with us is nobody's very good at communicating. I don't think this is like a breakthrough thought. I think probably we all kind of know that. But in this story, or in his book, he talks about when he first started hosting Nova. And he would prepare. You know, he would know he was going to go talk to this researcher. He would read a lot, and he would get ready, and he would go in with a list of questions. And he found out pretty quickly that just didn't work. It set up this barrier between him and the research. The questioning didn't flow the way he wanted it to flow. And what he found is when he put those questions away and just started to listen to the person describe what they were doing, or you know, what was their research, or what science are they up to today, it just became this free-flowing conversation. And it was so much better than going in and asking a bunch of questions. So he actually stopped preparing altogether, which I think is like a big jump. But he's a trained actor and trained in improvisation. And so that's kind of the basis of what he does here. Has anybody had the chance to do his thing here? Oh, you guys are so lucky. We have the Center for Mindfulness. Chuck had it in at our place. That's what we get. Mindful. You guys get to communicate. But I just thought it's such a wonderful thing. And one thing that a couple of doctoral fellows, I think, recently their PhD doing postdocs, a few years ago got some money from NOVA, because NOVA was trying to encourage this amongst communities, and they started a science cafe at one of the coffee shops in town, which was really cool, because they brought in researchers, not necessarily all from the medical school, some were, but from Holy Cross and from MIT, because there's so many schools around, they could bring people in to talk about their research to the community, just to people in the coffee shop, not on campus, and it forced them to talk in a way people could understand them. Some were better than others, but it was a great venue and a way for them to practice doing that. And I thought it was wonderful. And I learned, really reading this book and just being inspired even before I found the book and read it, but just the whole art of empathy is a big thing, and being an empathetic listener or an active listener, and just being, as he would say, curious. You need to be curious. I think that when I think about ourselves and our own work in libraries, hardly anybody that I know as a friend who isn't a librarian, they don't have a clue what I do all day long. I think everybody's kind of like that to some degree. Nobody really knows what you do. And in the same way, I don't know what people are doing around my campus anywhere. And being curious about it and just asking is the greatest way I've learned to find out things and to discover what's going on. Both of my parents were public school teachers, so I knew what people did. I knew what they did for a living because I went to school myself, and so I knew what teachers did. But I would watch shows like Leave It to Beaver or whatever, reruns, not the original, and Ward would always go off to the office. I had no idea what people did in an office. Like, what does he do all day? And in the same way, I have no idea what's going on in all of our labs. But one of the great things I got to do working with the Translational Science Center, and even before, just bumbling around, was just go and ask people what they do. And I started a little podcast myself, just on fun, outside of work, because I wanted to learn how to do it. And I went and I talked to the woman who's the head of our microbiome center, and she plays drums. I'm a musician as well, and she plays drums, and so we had a connection. And so she was able to talk to me about her science and what they're doing with all the gut stuff, and then we talked about creativity and her playing music and how playing music can translate over to science. How this creative part of her thinking always helps her in her work to come up with different things. And I discovered a lot of people do that. We have our whole, we have writers and painters and all kinds of people, and photographers, and they show their work in the library. And it's a great way to kind of connect with folks and how they come about doing what it is they're doing. But it's about listening, and it's about sharing and telling people what we do as well, hoping that they're interested in what we do. We can make it interesting. But I think that's really the key. Eleanor Roosevelt said, I think at a child's birth, if a mother could ask a fairy godmother to endow it with the most useful gift, that gift should be curiosity. And I think she was a pretty wise person. So, lesson 4 is just a little bit on reality. I go back to my photo of how things, so this was 10 years ago. It's going to be updated even more today because we've got new departments, new research centers since then, new research areas popping up. We recently had a pediatric ophthalmologist was recruited from Tufts. You would think, they moved mountains for this woman. She must be really good. But, all of this stuff had to be done for her, and all these departments were getting involved. And so you think, what does she need? But she's already been in touch with the library, which is great for us. We don't have to reach out. But, all these things come about with stem cells and regenerative medicine and all this stuff that's happening. And it's just more and more of that, which just basically says we're outnumbered in what we're trying to do. There's so much. And I think this is certainly not just the library people. We're all outnumbered, no matter what we're doing. Clinicians are outnumbered, and researchers are, they're not numbered enough. They don't have enough funding to go after what they're doing. They're fighting against each other. This is like this kind of whole battle that's so hard to do. And so I was curious, and someone asked me today, how many people are at the medical school? So, well, there are 4,500 people here from this little list, and we've done the number of students in all of our programs. We are a standalone graduate school. We're part of the 5-campus University of Massachusetts, but we're in Worcester all by ourselves. We are all graduate students, medical school, graduate school of nursing, and graduate school of biomedical sciences. So we have no undergrads. We have no young students we can grab to work the desk in the library or anything like that, just to our detriment. But I add this up, so it's like about 4,500, and then there's about 2,000 other people who work on campus. And then I'm not even counting, like, we had 6 major educational clinical spots around the state, Bay State Hospital out in Springfield and way out in the western Mass, and then a couple towards Boston, and then we had 26 teaching affiliate sites all over, all these things, right? And we had 7 professional librarians charged to serve all of these people. We had my group, the Research and Scholarly Communications group, and then we have the Educational and Clinical Services group. So I did the math, and that's like a 1 to 930 ratio of people that we should serve. Now, the good news is that we have an open position in Education and Clinical Services, and we actually have an interviewee candidate coming on Thursday. We have some others coming in, but that will bring the ratio down to 1 to 812. So we're actually moving in the right direction there in terms of thinking. But if you think of people and you think of projects and you think of patients, you just have to take into account. And I learned this modeling a lot working in the CTSA and watching. There's only so much. There's only so many projects you can do, only so many grants you can go after, only so many projects you can fund. And so you have to do a few things. You have to have some good judgment. You have to think about how, what's the real thing that works best for what we have, what we can do right now, and timing and such. You have to be able to make priorities. You have to set them and do this. And this was a hard lesson for me to learn, less in the library than when I got out of the library and I was working for this center in this kind of confined space. And though there were a lot of projects going on, this is where I learned the demand from PI of I needed that yesterday. Like, you can't even think. And it's very hard, getting, so what I did learn about that was how to kind of stay ahead of the game, like stay ahead of the ball game and sort of keep stuff together. We also have to learn to make choices. Has anybody else read the book or seen the movie Touching the Void, Joe Simpson, the climber? It's very short story. He's British and a British partner, and they were in South America trying to climb this place that everybody's had a really hard time. Nobody had ever reached this peak before. There's a big bad storm, you can imagine, and he falls. He breaks his leg, breaks his leg, and then he's on that rope, and his friend's trying to get him down, and he goes over the crevasse. It never ends. The story is on. And so he's hanging there. He's hanging, Joe, and his friend's holding him and figuring surely he's dead by now. Cuts the rope. Since Joe falls to the bottom, doesn't give away. I'm not giving anything away to know he wrote the book, and so he survives. But it's just this incredible story of doing it. But there's one line, and I first time I read it in the book, and then I saw the movie, and I wrote it down, and I always keep it. And he's like, you've got to make decisions. You've got to keep making decisions, even if they're the wrong decisions. You've got to make decisions. Otherwise, you're stuffed. And I think that's really where we are sometimes. Like you can't stand still in this world. You get run over, and so you have to just make some good choices and make some decisions. And sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. One of my librarian friends is very fond of we're always in beta world, which I don't particularly like, but it's not like always being in beta, but the truth is we kind of are. We're always being changed and moved through things, and so you kind of have to do that. And then I think the other thing is to not be afraid to grow new things, and I learned a lot in terms of clinical and basic science research, both. I think when you just watch researchers and how they do, they just try stuff. Just try a lot of stuff, and I think it's a great model for us in our own world. And you try things based upon, what you might like or what you do. We have a couple of librarians in our library who are just really into graphic medicine. And so they've taken it upon themselves to build a small collection. They educate the medical students about it. They educate clinicians about it. We right now have the traveling exhibit from National Library of Medicine on graphic medicine. And it's just been a really fun thing, and that's just something they're into, and they've been able to make connections based on that. And I think that's just take a risk and do something that you kind of want to do. Which leads me to the last on being, with apologies, Chris Tippett, name for show, which I like very much. But if you think back on your 5 words about yourself, and kind of think about, this is not from the movie, but the movie Apollo 13, you remember the scene? They're up there, and they're all in that thing, and the CO2 levels are rising, and they're like, oh yeah, because this was built for 2 people and not 3, the sponge thing, and they're all stuck up there. And the guy comes in with a box of stuff, and there are all the engineers sitting around there, and he throws it on the table, and he's like, all right, people, the guys upstairs had handed us this big one. We got to come up with it now. We got to get this thing to fit in this thing with only these things. One of my favorite scenes in the movie. And these are the actual people here, so that's Deke Slayton holding the thing that they had to fix the filter into, and a bunch of other people from the control center that day. So if you look back on your 5 words to describe you, and you think about whatever work you do, so even if you're not a librarian now, think about whatever work you do, how can you make any of those 5 things fit into this thing over here, which is your job? And how can you bring those things together? Because this is all you got, and this is what needs to be done. And so think of it that way. And I'll tell you the one example of this happened for me working over in the Translational Science Center. I was there one Friday afternoon. I was a little bit bored. I wanted the week to be over. I had this spreadsheet of our case scholars, the people that we give scholarship money to do educational clinical research growth. And how many other grants they got and how many publications they had, blah, 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 all that sort of thing. It was a very boring Excel spreadsheet. And I said, well, I like to draw. I like to doodle. To be creative. And so I took that information and I just drew this little picture out. I don't even know if I just used PowerPoint or something at the time. Just drew this, here's people, and here's this, and this. And I just printed it out. I liked it. It was my Friday afternoon. Stuck it on my office door. My PI came by the next day, and she's like, what is this? Or Monday, next week, and she's like, what is this? And I said, oh, I was just messing around. And I never presented it to her because she had been a person up to this point who had always said to me, just give me the numbers. She was like that kind of person. And she's like, this is really neat. And she stopped and kept looking at it. And then she started asking me to do one for this. And then, could you do another one for this? Oh, and how about this? Could you do this for this? And so it just became this niche thing that I could do because I liked to draw and I could make these infographics about stuff. And even we had a new president of UMass came in, Marty Meehan became the president. He was coming to meet with the dean and chancellor, and the dean even called me up and said, Sally, I need one of those things that you do that shows that the 5 campuses work together. And I need it, tomorrow. And so I came up with the little one up there and just used the colors, and he loved it. They all loved it. It was just a great thing. And so what I learned from this is really, you got to find the holes that are out there, and then you fill the holes with yourself. And whatever it is that you can do to kind of make things go better. What's unique about you as individuals, as teams, as a library, as an institution, as universities? We all have unique things. We've been sharing them throughout the days. We have the Bladderstone collection. You all have the dental tool collection here. Or, we have certain researchers who are, world-renowned in this area, and so that becomes a thing. We have a Nobel laureate, which is so great. He almost ran me over in a crosswalk one day, and I thought, that'll be on my gravestone, and I would run down by Craig Mello. But they're all into RNA interference, and so they have a whole center around that, because that's what's unique and good to our institution and university. And the same thing applies for our libraries. We are good at certain things based upon who's working there. And if we can leverage those strengths, I think we do really well about it. So what have I learned? Well, what I learned is this, basically. One, when you leave places, not everything you were doing beforehand gets carried on. You just have to let go of that because of this unique aspect. And similarly, when you leave again, I don't know if there'll be any infographics out of this CTS anymore. And it makes me a little sad. Nate may still call me and ask me to do them. It would be nice. But, I'd be happy to because I like doing it. But I could take it and teach people how to do it. You know, that can be a whole new thing that I can bring into the library. So that's one of the things that I've learned. We kind of travel along, we learn new things and we adapt and we do other kind of stuff. And so I learned a lot of lessons on collaboration and on coordination and communication and reality and being. And I hope they've shared something with you. And I hope that they'll help you leave your mark wherever you go. This is a better mark than dogs can leave, like the paw print. The other mark they always leave. But I hope that you'll take that, find something to heart, whether you're still in the library or working somewhere else or do whatever else you're doing. Leave your mark wherever you go, which I think is why we're all here today, because someone left their mark on this institution and on the library and left this, and so I was very honored to be able to present in Antonia's honor. So thank you. And any questions or comments or thoughts? Stories to tell?
So your school, you correctly observed, is very similar to Stony Brook, in that there's a group of basic scientists who are classic basic scientists, clinicians who are pressed more and more to spend all of their time with patients.
Mm-hmm.
Now the clinic CTSA, by definition, you have to get them working together on these projects, and you've indicated that there's different type, big teams, small teams, etc.
Mm-hmm.
What have you found to be the biggest handicap in getting these together, and any tips you might have of getting these two groups who really think differently about and always have?
They do. I would have to say one of the more positive, troubling things we have is we never have enough money for research. Because we have more people who want clinicians who want to do some research with basic scientists than we can ever have funding for, which is a nice problem to have in some ways. But that didn't happen right away. You know, the first few years we had to do a lot of ramping up, and I think there's still ramping up to be done in terms of education for clinicians. So we have a Master's of Science in Clinical Investigation program that we've started. The MD PhD students have always kind of had one foot in both places, but that's kind of a pretty small group of students matriculating. But the MSCI students have grown a bit. A lot of the new not junior faculty, but newer investigators are really taking this on, and I think that that's kind of going to be the pushing point forward. I think that we have some remarkable clinicians who just really want to do this amazing kind of research, and I think the CTSAs, in terms of educational funding, is really a wonderful model for them. I just wish there was more. We always want more money to do that. But a couple of other things that happened. So the large Sherman building, our last building that was built, purposefully integrated the med students, onto floors, and everybody's intermingled. No one discipline. I mean, they didn't mix up all the disciplines of science by any means, but they tried to sort of mix up disciplines a little bit to sort of almost physically force people to run into each other, which was kind of an interest. I'm sure they didn't do that haphazardly. I'm sure there's research to back it up. There's like the one big cafeteria, so people really started to have conversations with one another, and I think that that's been really helpful. I think it's been successful in terms of folks coming up with new things. There are always the folks who are just here, I'm here, but We keep offering programs and through the CTSA that I think are really kind of encouraging that it's not always easy because it's like, I think I always, if I had my way, if I had been in charge, we would have had a big fair, the CTSA, and put out all the cores and everything so that people could see these are all this stuff. Because our IT department has done that for the last several years, and everybody's like, holy smokes, who knew the IT department did all this stuff? You know, they'll build apps for you, they'll do, you know, this computing stuff for you, they got a gazillion things going on, and I think it's really been they tapped into something by doing a big fair every fall so that people can really see, oh yeah, they create a problem for themselves because now they can never do everything that they want to do, but that's the problem you want, like, you know, you want to be, so I would personally like to see the Translational Science Center, or even all the different research cores kind of do that a little bit, to come together in a big day and go, oh yeah, and do that. So I think that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is kind of a related question. So the clinical duties, to put it in brief, are one kind of drag coming together process, but there's also external drag that comes from the funding agencies, particularly the NIH, which is good that we have, but tends to be, as we hear people complain, rather conservative in funding or even worse. In any case, the basic scientists get some reward from doing what they're already good at. They get funding and keep doing that. And how do we overcome that? There are funds for pilot project type things and so on, but they're very limited, and it's hard to get anything done with them.
Yeah, they really are. And I hear from the physician scientists who, you know, want to do this. One we had is a really, really talented surgeon, and she's just like, but she also wants to do research, and she constantly has to turn down, you know, money from not government money, but corporate money that will come to her to do research because it simply doesn't work within the schema of surgery. Like you don't have time to do this, you know. So you have to have a really supportive kind of department. The same way our cardiology department is somewhat different, and they really encourage their physicians if they are interested in doing research, and they've supported them a lot, and we've seen a lot of stuff come out of that. But yeah, I think there are a lot of barriers, which that's why we have this steamroll, that we're just trying to bring people together. I know I was saying to someone earlier, I think when at one time, I think our NIH funding was around 75% of all the research we were doing. It's probably around 50 right now. You know, it's just dropped off precipitously. So we're looking more and more to other foundations or to other agencies for our researchers to continue doing the work they do, because we just can't depend on NIH like you used to kind of be able to depend upon. There's also a lot of training among not only the med students, but particularly the biomedical science students in other careers besides academia, besides staying in research. We have a center to kind of help those students sort of see all the other things that they might be able to do with their degree, because the chances of staying in academia anymore are pretty small. So it's a challenge. But I think programs like the career training programs out at NIH are good, but certainly not enough. There are not enough of them. You know, a few agencies step up. NSF, I'm sure, has things. Howard Hughes, we have some Howard Hughes young scholars have gotten stuff, but it's tough.
Thank you for your talk. You know, according to the adage, one should always be wary about becoming a jack of all trades and a master of none, but you've just argued that your job and that of other librarians is to become, in effect, the jack of all trades, whereas the expectation used to be the master of the castle, you know, in the fashion of Cardinal Newman. And I'm wondering, you know, I've talked about this phenomenon with other librarians, and folks who do the other sorts of things that you do. And there's two laments that I hear articulated. One's personal and one's sort of institutional. The institutional one is that in being forced to become a utility player, you basically, because of money, because of economic pressure, are unwittingly feeding into a post-truth society.
Yes.
Where, all facts, there's this great democracy of all facts, open access, this bewildering morass of having to distinguish what's legit and what's not, whereas the librarian, used to be a gatekeeper, as it were. And the personal lament, at the risk of sounding elitist, because that's not how I intend to come across, is that there's something charming where lifelong praxis has gone into qualifying you, and all sorts of other romantic things into being the person at your institution that is charged with doing the important detective work of genuine research, and that there's something to be said for having scholars who are serious go through those gates. And I'm wondering, I guess my question is, A, do you buy my assessment, and B, and that reported to me, and B, do you personally feel gypped that you're forced to become this utility player, jack of all trades, and the waning of this romantic, highly intellectual detective type of person who is tantamount to research on all fronts? I certainly see this as a problem.
Yes. I agree. I think for part of what has happened in my career has been self-preservation. It's just kind of fallen that way. I do think that I do think there's something to be said for all of the things you were saying. I think particularly we're at such a strange point in time in terms of information and stuff being out there, facts being facts, and that. But I just don't. I can't even envision a time where it will go back. I just can't. It's like the box is open. I cannot ever see how we could wrestle it back. That said, I think that we have to continue to. The onus is on the librarian. I am of that mindset that we can sit back and be sad that nobody comes to the library anymore, or that nobody needs us, or everybody get everything at their desktop, or we can say that's really not the truth. That's not true. People do still need us, and we have to figure out the best ways to meet their needs. I will say the one thing in terms of, I'm very proud to be a librarian, and I argue, I've had many an argument with colleagues, dear friends, who want to change their title to something else because they think that's our problem. That people just think of librarians a certain way. We have this stereotype, we can't ever break it, and that's our biggest problem. If we only called ourselves something else, that would solve our problem. And I'm like, no, I think we just need to educate people upon what things that we have always done. We've always been technically savvy behind the scenes. People just didn't know it, and so we can kind of get out there and do that. Just looking at the data, this whole data thing, it just makes me crazy when we don't think about engaging in that larger conversation because it's so open to us. It's such a wonderful opportunity. I think if we don't take advantage, we're really, truly selling ourselves short to let people know that we have a seat at this table, and a very credible seat, and this is why. Because we've been doing this a long time. That kind of a thing. I would long for the day that I could sit and really hone my skills into one particular area and a research area. And it could be because of the fact I work in a standalone medical center. I just walking around here, I'm like, oh, you guys have so many different departments. It would be so much fun to do projects. We just don't have that where I am. And so it kind of had to make my career be what it is. But I do think I've developed expertise in a few pretty critical areas around, in terms of scholarly communication and publishing and copyright and things like that, which nobody else has that on campus, And people do know that is still a very important role in the library, that the library covers that. and then I'm the person who come to see, or some of my people are the people who come to see. And I think we can just kind of develop those things, other skills that we're just really good at, and kind of promote that. I wish it was I wish I could just sit and help a research group do things. One of the things I learned, not one of it, but being in a translational science center, I couldn't do it. And I thought I would be for them, their personal librarian. But they didn't want it. That's not what they wanted. They didn't want me to sit and do, literature searches for them and do all that stuff. They wanted me to do this other stuff. And so, I don't know. I agree with what you're saying, and I would agree with the comments from other colleagues that it's difficult. And it is implement. But I also I'm just of the also mindset that I don't want to lament all day long in my job, so I better go find something else, another way to solve it. My retirement plan is to find a little public library somewhere, way out on the Cape or something, and just retire and be there like librarian in every traditional sense that I ever wanted to be. But I know what everybody's saying. Yeah, the whole generalist expert is long-standing.
Well, may I add a comment to your question and your answer? I think another way of looking at it is that librarians are figuring out, first of all, our field continues to change, as you were giving some examples. And so one thing that librarians have become good at, or realizing we have to do, is adapt. And so we are trying to figure out what are these clinicians needing? What is it? They don't want you to be the literature reviewer. They want you to do something else. So in a way, what we're doing every day is to look at our skill sets, our expertise, and say, how does this fit the new landscape of scholarship and scholarly communication? So in that way, I think that's a really good skill set to be able to adapt. And like I think you said, changes everywhere. It's very constant. So that's how we go with the change. How we fit into the changes that keep coming our way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you kind of get run over. I know, those of us who work in medical librarianship in particular, and it's certainly not every hospital library scenario, but too many hospital libraries closed because the librarians couldn't figure out what else to do. And it was crushing to watch so many of your friends lose their jobs, and even really successful hospital libraries got closed for other reasons. And that would be the argument. People would say that, I did everything I was supposed to do. I proved my worth, but they still shut me down. And that's you can't defend that. But you can also see a lot of, just this lag time in adapting, and it costs tremendously. And I think from the level of healthcare, it's cost healthcare tremendously. But
just to follow up on that comment, has there been any effort to quantify the impact of your work to find those holes and fill them, especially in relationships with your role in supporting clinical research?
It's a good project. I personally know, but there are a few papers out that people try, kind of showing. I think it's when they were talking about, there's been a great study which has been cited over and over about hospital libraries and do they actually improve care at the end? And that was an extensive study that was done by the folks at Rochester and North Carolina. I think it was a collaborative effort, and they were able to show some impact of what they did. I think the same needs to be done for the work that I do and my colleagues in research and scholarly communication need to do. And as we are supposedly the research impact tracking people, we should probably do it and get on it. So I think it's a call. That's what we need. We need quantifiable. We need the evidence to say this is why I do what I do. It works. From an administrative point of view. Good point.
when I made the introduction, I mentioned Pellegrino. And Pellegrino's view, he really was 20 years ahead of his time in everything, was that medicine was really so separate that it could be a university. And that's why he eventually left, when the university president said, no, you're part of the broader university, there can't be a medical university. So they parted on that. Now when we come down and the financial pressures are such that everything gets consolidated, they call in a consultant, put things together, put the medical library together with the main library. I'd be curious to know whether you think the uniqueness, which I think still is there, merits keeping the health sciences library separate from the main library, or maybe you do think that they all could be put together in a campus such as this, where we are on the same campus.
Right. My view is a little skewed in that, Worcester is the flagship campus of Massachusetts and Amherst, so we're an hour and a half away from them. There's camps at Boston, Lowell, Dartmouth, and us. So, geographically, we haven't approached that yet. We have dealt with the president's office and purchasing office and people saying, don't you think, why do we support 5 different libraries? Like, why do we have all these contracts for different libraries for journal subscriptions and stuff? And we've been able to show time and time again that it's actually cost effective to have 5 separate collections. Because we don't, they're specific, and in terms of licensing and things, it's to our benefit to stay the way that we are. Not to mention the library directors don't want to give up their autonomy in library. But we have actually been able to work out some, particularly with the Translational Science Center, when we are charged to work across 5 campuses, we've been able to work out some agreements with the library at Amherst to kind of share, because they do have resources that we need. And back, UMass Lowell has a great biomedical device incubator program coming up, so we've worked a lot with them, and just this year opened an incubator space on our own campus, so we could say to people, it's a lot cheaper rent in Worcester than Cambridge, so do your you guys are in Cambridge, do your work out here in Worcester. It's just a lot cheaper if you're, even if you're, somewhere in between our 2 cities. It's just, we can provide this for you, and we can provide all the resources you need around it. So it's a really very exciting time for that kind of stuff. But to share those resources, I know people who work in both kind of settings. I like the setting that I'm in. But it also, as I said earlier, has its drawbacks that I think there are a lot of, we could do, as medicine is becoming so interdisciplinary in terms of solving these big problems or big issues, that it's good to be close to a more, diverse, or a more traditional university. But I do kind of like the way that, we don't have any sports teams though, that upsets me. I want us to be the vectors. That was I want to be you guys, Mr. Vectors. So, it's a great name for it. But it didn't work out. I saw you all are playing, Stony Brook is playing, having homecoming. I did go to James Madison University in Virginia, and you are our homecoming victims. In a couple of weeks, we're taking you down. You should be URI, though. They're not very good. Anyway. Other thoughts or questions? Thank you so much again for the time. Thank